and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory, and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. What we are is a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights is we read old folklore and fairy tales. Tonight, we're going to be reading German folklore, but more specifically Sorbian folklore, concerning a character that we've read about before. I'm going to say a little bit on him, but not too much. If you do want to know more about him, there was a video we did about 4 months ago. March? How long ago was March? 5 months? Jeez, the year goes by. That was also about Pumphut. And you can hear a bit more about him there, and if you're interested. Anyways, if you are not watching this live, what you can do is skip over everything that doesn't interest you by going down to the description below, where there will be timestamps at the beginning of the 3 stories we're reading tonight, one of which is quite short, 2 of which are medium length. But if you are here live, can't skip over the stuff, sorry. But what you can do is join us in the live chat, where a crop of potatoes has already grown and is chattering amongst itself. Hello, Lizzie Rose, Genera, Jumstore, Tammy, GS, and Zombie Wolf. Their bus was late. What a shame. We just started though. Zombie Wolf, you didn't miss anything. It's very good to see all of you. I see GS says loves Rory's house. By Rory's house, I assume you mean the little image of the house in the Highlands there that I have at the beginning. Yeah, surprised they get Wi-Fi. Oh, it would be nice to have a place like that, though, for me anyways, for a person like me. Anyhow, this is neither here nor there. I'm going to say just a little bit about what we're talking about tonight, and then I'm going to get into reading the stories. It might be a bit shorter tonight. Unfortunately, I had to help a friend do something, nothing serious, but it was time sensitive and specific to me, so I wasn't able to do as much prep as usual, which is partially why the icon is barely different from the previous Pumphut one, though I doubt anyone even noticed. But a couple of things off the top before we even get into anything. The first thing is an exciting piece of news. Exciting if you're a person like me, and I think if you're here watching live, you probably are, which is Simon Roy Hughes, who's our translator of Asbjornsen and Moe and Norwegian folklore in general, who's done several translations, and we've read many of them, including the very excellent... Oh, sorry, I'm so bad at pulling names out of my head. I forget her name, but her book is Ringalahorn, which you can get on Simon Roy Hughes off of Amazon. Anyways, he undertook a few years ago, partially funded by a Patreon that I supported, the task of doing a proper and complete translation of the complete Norwegian folktales and legends of Asbjornsen and Moe. It's quite the undertaking. Took him many years. And 2 days ago, it finally released. It's a translation you can truly trust, which is arguably something that's never quite existed for Asbjornsen and Moe in the past. That's controversial, but I kind of come down on Simon Roy Hughes' side here that it's not really been a good stuff. It also includes stuff that has actually never been translated before to English. You should absolutely support it, because it is one of those things where, like, if stuff like that doesn't happen, all of these are going to slip away. You can buy them through Amazon. I know, and Simon knows about the Amazon things, but here's the thing: if you're self-publishing, which he basically has to do, as Asbjornsen and Moe, is niche, internationally, then your options are practically non-existent. It's like Amazon and almost nothing else. But anyways, I will hopefully remember to add the link to the pinned comments below, along with a link to Jürgen Hubert's Patreon, whose stories we're going to be reading tonight, a different translator of German. But I did want to say that Simon Roy Hughes has finally finished and released. He has 2 versions, one that's just the story and one that includes all the commentary and everything from Asbjornsen and Moe, which I think is the one you should get because that commentary is very insightful. Although I guess if you just want the stories, there's a version for that. One's obviously a little cheaper. You can get it on Amazon. If you can't wait, or you feel like you're going to forget or not come to this video when the comment's pinned, just look up The Complete Norwegian Folktales and Legends by Simon Roy Hughes, and it comes up, or it should. All right, just making sure that question wasn't directed at me. Sorry for the pause there. Okay, so you should definitely get that. I think the comment, he sort of frames the commentaries as for like studious types. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's a lot of stories that you're like, what does that mean? And the commentary is great. Also, one of the things that commentary is really good for is knowing about the other versions that Asbjornsen and Moe came across and collected, which is true of every folklorist. They will get like several versions of a tale from many different regions, and then they just kind of decide one to sort of render as the one. But it's really interesting to hear about the variations, and you're not going to get that without the commentary. My apologies if I've misrepresented any of the products mentioned here. Obviously, Simon knows them best. Simon Roy Hughes, you can talk or comment on his posts on Mastodon. If you have any really direct questions, I'm sure he will respond. He's a friendly fellow. Anyways, definitely get out there and support folklore if you like folklore. Otherwise, it's all just going to stay in its home language and we'll never know about it. Speaking of people that pull things out of a language after centuries, in some cases, of never being in English, all of our work tonight comes from Jürgen Hubert, who runs a Patreon called Sunken Castles Evil Poodles, which is a common topic on this channel because we read a lot of his stories, or his translations rather. If you go and support his Patreon right away, you will get, it's probably more than 1,000 translated stories from German that have never been translated before, many of which we've read on this channel, but many of which I have not. You know, I take selections from his chapter, but there's plenty more to discover. I also don't read his commentaries, which are also very insightful and good. Yeah, he's doing some stuff this month that I think I might read next month in Halloween month or October. But if you can't wait, you should get over there and try it out. Anyways, the Lizzie Rose says, I think I found it. The downside, Lizzie, is they're not going to let you post the link. The YouTube just doesn't let comments with links through because they almost always were spam. And it's, yeah. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about Pumphut, and then we will carry on. When we first met Pumphut back in March, it was a dozen tales about a magic figure, a sort of like fae-ish thing. Although it didn't really follow a lot of the standards of like Nixies and other things that we'd seen, it was kind of singular, a very idiosyncratic character, which comes up in all lore, but kind of in particular, like German and Celtic lore does this, where it's like, it's not a type of thing that they're discussing, like the Huldra. It's a specific instance of some strange magic creature. Anyways, I said at the time when we did that video, I said he seemed like a working class hero, maybe like something that should be on the seals of a union or something like that, because many of his tales were about Pumphut taking work as a millwright, which we'll still see coming up. He tends to do millwright work. And in some event, turn of events or whatever, whoever it was that came to agreement with him to do his work, and he would do his work well, would either insult or screw him out of his pay, try to trick him in some way. And in response, Pumphut would break what he built, or otherwise render it unusable, or curse a person, or something like that magically, until he got what was agreed, and then he would let it go. And I was like, well, that's an interesting sort of metaphorical framing of a union going on strike, right? So that's where that's kind of where I got that idea that he's sort of a working class fae, because he does do work and a lot of the fae don't. And we'll still see that in these tales, but these tales do deviate from the theme a bit that we were looking at in that one, though not entirely. We'll see more of the kind of random magic stories that don't seem to really have any point other than, wow, imagine that, which is really common for discussions of magic and folklore. And they don't really have such a thematic, clear through line as I think the first 12 stories did. Nonetheless, the message usually is the same with any of the Pumphut stories, not all, but most. And that is this: don't insult or screw over the thing you're depending on for help, whether that's work or otherwise. And so we're going to hear 3 stories about that, and then we're going to carry on. I do want to say one thing ahead. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because Sunken Castle's Evil Poodle's Master Volume is so big now, but there is some lag and my computer is old. There is some lag in this document, and sometimes it just goes white and crashes, in which case I'm going to have to open it again. I checked it on the task manager, and it is consuming 1.5 gigs of memory. Which is nuts for an EPUB file. Anyways, just a heads up. If it really gets bad, if I start seeing locking up and freezing, I might have to turn off sound effects as well. So our first story is sort of an account of several different accounts. It's written from a somewhat academic perspective, but it gives us some insight into the other aspects of Pumphut. And then we're going to see some tales about some of the magical stuff he does. Anyways. Our first story tonight is called Martin Pumphut, and it comes from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of recently translated German folklore, whose translator, Jürgen Hubert, you can support on his Patreon, Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. Even though this figure, Martin Pumphut, cannot be compared with a Samson of the Hebrews, which is the story of Samson, Bacchus of the Indians. Jürgen makes this note too, but I don't think I need to tell anybody here. I don't know why this author associates Bacchus most strongly with the Indians. Apparently there is some connection between Bacchus and the Indians, but Bacchus tends to come up as the god of wine and ritual dance for Greeks. Dionysus is the other name for him. Or Heracles of the Greeks. Nevertheless, the multitude of pranks, tall tales, and trickster stories attributed to him, which have been furthermore expanded upon with fairy tales and other narratives, make him appear as a true Proteus. Proteus is a Greek god, I think, of the sea, but I don't really understand that reference here either. There's a few moments of reference in this that don't necessarily resonate anymore, let's say it that way. And his name is still well known. Nope. Did it already crash? It looks like it already crashed. Give me a second. My apologies. If you jump to this section, you'll be wondering what's happening. This document is a little hard on my very old computer and occasionally locks up. And his name is still well known among vagabonds and mill workers. Here are merely a few of the many legends which are circulating about him. It is claimed that he had seen the light of day in the small village of Spola, where lies near Hyasvarda. Soon after his birth, he allegedly had gotten out of his crib, it is unknown how, and instead a large, harmless snake was found within, likely a grass snake. He gives a name here, Coluber natrix, which are not uncommon in that region. The frightened parents immediately rushed into all directions to find the small boy, but they had to return empty-handed. To their great joy, they then found him hale and hearty in the crib again. I should say before moving on, this thing about a magic character finding a snake or something young, it has a lot of different versions, but it is something that comes up. When he'd become 6 years old, a mob of gypsies, just a reminder, that is a slurred name now. It's an offensive name for Romania people. In this context, though, it seems like it might be less specifically focused on Romania. It might be more about just strange people coming through. Likely those, though. But yes, that's a dated word at best. Don't use it outside of historical context. Traveled through the village. When individual members of this group had scattered around the settlement in order to collect food, heal animals, or sell amulets, bandages, salves, and so forth, a man, accompanied by a woman, also stepped into his parents' home. There, the boy drew their attention, and they gave him his horoscope, or like reading, if you will, and assured him of the following fortune. He will travel far throughout the world. Well, he will remain in a low station in life. He will attain riches, draw a lot of attention, and finally find his end because of a woman. The boy now grew older, learned the German language in addition to his native Wendish tongue, and which was a sign of considerable erudition among the common people of those times, and was active in the manner of all boys of his age. At night, when he was asleep in bed, people saw strange figures floating above his head. However, because they did not cause any harm, they were not paid any further attention. Furthermore, when he roamed around at night, a flame in the form of a bowling pin was noticed in front of him and behind him. A reminder that bowling is much older than like 1950s bowling alleys. Anyways, at an older age, he learned the miller's profession. Just for modern context, miller, by the way, means stone that you crush grain into flour between, like a windmill. That's what they mean. During these, he was given his nickname because of his high-pointed, broad-brimmed hat. How and in what manner he attained the secret sciences and the strange art which he is now famous for, legend does not say. And we must believe that he really possessed them, as he accomplished marvelous things. Almost like the old one, he was everywhere and nowhere, soon here and soon there. Apparently the old one's a reference to an 18th century novel that I am not familiar with. For soon he hailed across the seas, Zala, Eba, and Mulada, in a boat made out of paper, and soon he hurried through the air on a giant grasshopper. Here he cut a millstone apart, similar to the well-known Roman king. Jurgen, in his commentary, makes a guess as to what Roman king he means, but you're welcome to make your own. As it still can be seen carved into stone in the great mill at Budesen. And over there in Dresden, he got all the windmills moving by merely blowing through a nose hole. And when a mill shaft was prepared in Walgersdorf, he noted in passing that it was too short. He was laughed at. But when he returned, the others realized he was right and asked for his help. And he pulled it as if it were pretzel dough and thus added the missing L. L is just a measurement that's, like all measurements of this time, incredibly inconsistent. like 2 inches or so, whatever. In Highlingbaya, he hurled his axe against the church tower where it struck and can still be seen today. By the way, that's one of the most popular tales, or common tales, associated with Pumphut. In the pub, Zum Goldenen Sieb in Leipzig, he made a lot of hares walk out of the pot in broad daylight, and then made them walk back in. Here he redirected the river Zala from its bed and assigned it to flow into different directions so that the millers who had not given him a gift would be unable to grind flour. In contrast, others who had received him warmly never had any shortage of water afterwards, and thus became wealthy. At another time, when a cheating, coarse horse trader denied him a seat on a pack horse when he was tired, he turned the trader's horses into hay poles. Soon he was granted a bountiful harvest to a farmer who had taken care of him when he was ill. Soon he helped General Zabilski. It is unknown how he made his acquaintance, to fight his enemies with ghostly soldiers, a story actually we're going to read. Soon he flew through the air with him to Washa in order to attend splendid balls and so forth. Incidentally, he must have lived for several centuries, for in this manner he has presented himself in Hildesheim as the well-known spirit Hurchen. Later, he has provided vital services to the Duke of Friedland, Albrecht of Weinstein, in the form of a little gray man, and finally, near the end of the 7 Years' War, he vanished from an inn in Paderborn, while in the company of a rather enchanting woman, and only left his hat behind. No one has heard of his activities since then. GS says this guy is really powerful. He is in a very specific direction, but I think the most important thing there is he is distinctly a piece of Sorbian folklore. And while I won't go out of my way to talk about a culture I wouldn't feign to understand with much depth, I think especially at that time it was a culture like many of mostly working class folk. And I think it's interesting that he sort of represents those values. You know, when somebody's in trouble, it is expected that you would give them help. You would help have solidarity with your people. And when they don't, they suffer for it. But I also think it's interesting the way that, like, people who refuse to help or don't listen or laugh or mock or whatever else are punished for it. But not in the way that Fae normally do. Punished in a way where, like, they're humbled, and if they change their behavior, he'll help them out. GS says that ending leaves so much room for speculation. I do wonder, because I've not really seen this part of the tale of a woman being his ruin. I mean, that's not unusual for folklore. But I do wonder if that reference to Samson in the beginning might have been to frame our expectations as to what happened here without directly saying it. But that would be the collector imposing that interpretation. Okay. Well, there we go. There's some stories of Pumphut. But let's focus in on a story of Pumphut doing the thing he is most famous for doing, which is messing around with mills. Pumphut is fundamentally a millwright. And at that time, it's somebody who sort of fabricates and repairs and runs mills. So this is a shorter story, but it does capture a lot of what Pumphut often does. And I don't know, I find it charming. GS says, yes, not in a mischievous way. Yeah, and I think there's something to that, because very often the Fae almost behave with the arbitrariness you would expect a working class person trying to figure out, a narcissistic lord's intentions, right? Like, I feel like there might be a connection there where you really don't know all this weird society stuff and why is he mad today and whatever else, and their ruinous punishments they would visit on peasants they didn't like and whatever else. But Pumphut isn't like that. He makes his point. GS, instead of Delilah cutting Samson's hair and taking his strength, this woman takes his hat off. I do think maybe that's the implication, because there's that point that he left his hat behind. His hat seems to be, they don't know when he got it. It seems to be the source of his power. I will also add, I'm not reading it, but it is in the collection. There are stories that just implicate that he must have gotten his powers from the devil, which was a very popular thing back then. But, yeah. Okay. This feels like a sunny field. This story. Our next tale is called Pumphut and the Mill Shaft. And it also comes to us translated by Jürgen Hubert from Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles. Don't crash on me. Also, the story kind of just starts like in the middle of a thought. I don't know why. He made demands in a mill which were too high, and the people there did not pay him anything, but instead made promises they did not keep. He, I assume, is Pumphut. And that's what you don't want to do with Pumphut. Then he left, walked past the carpenters who mocked him, and then their master said, "Don't laugh at this man. If you haven't known Pumphut before, you shall get to know him very well." And they were currently cutting a mill shaft. And when they examined it closely, it was too short, and they could not put it into the mill. Then the master said, "Fetch Pumphut back and say friendly words to him." Pumphut did not want to come back, and finally, though, he took pity on them and let himself be talked into returning. "You've cut it wrong, but that's not such a big deal. I shall think about how this can be fixed." And then they had to pull on one end of the mill shaft, and he pulled on the other, and then it became too long. "We need to cut it again," complained the carpenter. "It's not necessary to cut it," said Pumphut, took his hat, struck it against the mill shaft, and then it was shorter again. So we see that there is this sort of trend in his stories where he is always... Genera says mill shaft. So mill shaft... far be it from me... I'm probably going to get part of this wrong. So far be it from me to really explain this historical. But they're talking about windmills for the most part, although it could be water wheels, right? But let's pretend it's a windmill for now. Windmill from the outside has the big windmill, right? The point of a windmill is to mill with the wind, the power of the wind. And it has a gear that joins a shaft that runs down into a stone, which it turns, that grinds the flour. So my understanding of a mill shaft is it's that pole, which is a long piece of wood that has to be planed down to the right size and fit into the millstone, and, not be too naughty wood or whatever else. And I imagine what happens, especially in a time before measuring sticks and whatever else, something that precise that decides, the pressure and whatever of it on a millstone, I imagine it was probably not uncommon to accidentally cut it too short, and now there's nothing you can do. You have to make a new one, and that's a huge amount of work back then. So I think what he is doing here is he's really helping the working class out of their own mistakes by pulling the mill shaft. Yeah, that's my best understanding. If you are watching this later and you're like, I know a ton about the history of this, that's incorrect, do not be afraid to tell me that in the comments. I will be interested in some references because that's just my nature. But I've been wrong before, and I will be wrong again. I'm not really a historian per se. Okay. Daenerys says, I gotcha. Yeah. I wasn't sure if I would need to explain that. I did. It was a thought that crossed my mind. I was like, maybe I should explain mills and whatever else, but obviously I should have. Okay. Now this takes a less kindly view of Pumphut. It also takes a view of Pumphut that I don't normally see. So you take that for however you will, which is he's a bit of a drunk in this. It's not hard to believe, but I don't remember that being the case elsewhere. GS says, but if they get cheeky, he reverts it back to being too short. Yeah, because basically he came along, they insulted him, and then they were like, wait, actually we need you, come back and help. He comes back and helps, but it's too long, which isn't really a huge problem when you're a carpenter. You can just cut it down again. The problem is too short. But he still complained about it, so then he was like, you know what? Screw you. Take your short shaft. But I think the most important difference here with Pumphut is, like, he's never really in the wrong. Like, the thing with a lot of the face characters we've encountered, who knows why they make the decisions they make? Like, they do things, and they're like, remember, you should have gone, you never go south 7 strides when asked. You only go 6, and so now I own all your children, and I've turned them to gold and thrown them in a lake. And you're like, why? Like, I think there's a kind of arbitrariness and cruelness inherent to a lot of the Fae that just isn't there with Pumphut, which I find fascinating. Maybe. GS says, now I know where they say getting the short shaft. Okay. Our last story of the night is called Pumphut and the Old Dessauer. And it also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, whose Patreon, where he translates previously untranslated English folklore, or German folklore to English. You can support him. Jürgen Hubert. Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. I will have that pinned in the comment below. Pumphut was a profligate, which, if you don't know, sort of a spendthrift and drunk, and had run out of money. As he had nothing left, he wanted to get some from the old Dessauer. The latter had a pleasure garden and a pond with fish, and because he was unable to reach the old Dessauer otherwise, Pumphut plucked apples in his pleasure garden and fished at the pond so that he would be caught. The warden forbade him to fish, but when he had walked around the pond and the dike, to stop him, I assume, Pumphut merely ran away over the water, magical old fellow that he is. And as he could not be stopped from fishing, the Dessauer told the warden, shoot him. The first time the warden used a buckshot. For those who don't know, it's a bunch of pellets. The pellets fell into Pumphut's hand, and the warden saw how he threw them back into the pond. The second day, he was fishing again. Then the warden loaded a bullet and shot at him the second time, and when he shot, Pumphut took off his hat, and the bullet fell inside. And then he looked, threw it into the pond. When the warden told this to his master, he said, we must cast a golden bullet, which should work. Then the warden shot at him with a golden bullet, which fell into Pumphut's hat once again. He looked at it, pulled it into his pocket, and said, I can use that one, and walked away. Then the Dessauer did not know what else to try, and said, I want to speak with him, and he must come to the meal. And in this manner Pumphut visited the old Dessauer and stayed with him. He also told him that he would assist him when he had a war, as he'd sent such beautiful bullets his way. A few years later, the Dessauer had a war and fetched for Pumphut. Pumphut then requested that as many pieces of wood needed to be cut as the Dessauer needed men, or else he planted wood cuttings, and suddenly lots of cavalrymen stood there. He planted millet as well, and these were the footmen. Then he told the old Dessauer that he should put these in front, for then the enemy could shoot at those, and once the enemy had wasted all their shots, he should use his real soldiers, and then he would overcome the enemy. And then the old Dessauer did so and won the battle. When the war was over, the old Dessauer fetched for him again and supported him so that he could live well. Finally, though, they fell out with each other, for Pumphut had drunk too much and told the old Dessauer, "My name is Pumphut, and your name is Comfort." I'm going to read Jürgen's note here, but just to be clear, I don't think any of us really knows what that means. This is Jürgen. As far as I can figure out, this meant that Pumphut claimed that the old Dessauer was wearing a wooden bowl on his head, I guess in contrast to his nice tall hat, which was rather unfavorable comparison to himself. Anyways, then the old Dessauer wanted him to be shot. But when they shot at him, Pumphut, of course, took down his hat and said, "I don't need this crap," and poured all the bullets out again. "No, no," said the old Dessauer. "Yes, yes, my dear fellow. This is a secret which Pumphut has kept for himself," for Pumphut had told him everything, except how to shoot someone dead. It is also told Pumphut was forbidden to go into the garden, and then they set 2 dogs on him, but they did not do anything to him and instead wagged their tails. The old Dessauer was drilling soldiers. Pumphut watched this. This is another little tale, added note. And immediately had an army and drilled them as well. And then the old Dessauer had someone ask if these were his enemies or friends. Pumphut had a triangular hat, and different bullets came out from each corner, and the hat was able to shoot on its own. Make of what you will the little cut scenes at the end, cutting room floor stuff at the end. There you go. Jump story. Yeah, I mean it's German though, so it doesn't mean what we mean. That's definitely one of the least traditional Pumphut stories that I've found. But it's still in keeping. It's just weird that he's sort of a drunk that wants to get money from a ruler. It's not usually where he lingers. But I do it's not the only story of him that does this, but I do he was supposedly not able to be shot. And it's not uncommon for them to try a silver bullet or a gold bullet. They shoot him, he catches it, and he's like, "Yeah, thanks for the money. See you later." Which is, frankly, a good joke. But anyways, yeah. We made it through without... GS says that was nonsensical but entertaining. Isn't it always? I guess the only thing that I ever feel when I hear about nonsensical stuff in folklore is I do wonder if it was always nonsensical, or whether there's just some context that's lost to time where I would have absolutely loved it at one age, if I'd been born at the right time. It's hard to say. All right. Zombie Wolf says, as a random trivia, the United States is the only modern democracy that uses an electoral college to elect a president. I guess I've never really thought about it. I mean, I did know that, but I guess I didn't really think about what the previous ones would have been if that's a thing that has ever existed in any other country. GS says, "Oh, we are missing the context for sure." I guess so. I mean, it's hard to say. Anyhow, like I said, a little bit shorter today. Didn't have as much free time as I normally do. Tammy says, "Thank you so much for the stream tonight, Rory and the gang. Hope everyone has sweet dreams. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy yourselves as well. I really like Pumphut. But actually, there's a bunch of stories I've been meaning to get to from Jurgen's collection that have come up in the last few months. I sometimes wonder if I know he's not. He plans this stuff out years ahead, but sometimes there's choices I'm like, this is being done specifically for me. Because there's stuff in there that I specifically find interesting. But a lot of it's actually really good for October, so I'm going to try and run it then. Jumpstore says, good stories tonight. Thank you, Rory Knight. Yeah, thank you, Jumpstore. I hope your day... I didn't get a chance to talk to people much, but I hope you feel good. Lazy Rose says, requesting a pinned comment for that. Thank you for the reminder for Simon Roy Hughes' book. Yes, once this video is no longer live, there should be a pinned comment. That shows you the translation of Asbjornsen and Moe by Simon Roy Hughes, which you absolutely should get. You should also support Jürgen Hubert in his translating of this work. His pricing structure had to change a bit because they took away the per piece thing that they used to have, but apparently on the whole it's a net benefit to the average person. But he has 3 tiers. I think at any of the tiers you get the basic collection, but double check that. And the collection is huge, so it's well worth it. All right, well, I didn't notice that Tammy wasn't feeling well. I hope you do soon. And other than that, I'll keep the fire warm. You folks have a good sleep.